I thank you again for coming out in such massive numbers. I'll keep fighting for you, and now it's time to hear from John Fenton. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you this evening. I'm just amazed by the diversity here. I think what first impressed me most about the Australian people is the stance that you've taken to protect yourselves. Unconventional gas and oil production has very little resemblance to the oil and gas drilling of the past. And when I saw the prospect of the continent of Australia being drilled and turned into the mess that we've had to deal with, I'm very impressed with the stance the Australian people have taken, and I just like to express my gratitude to you because you're setting an example that the rest of the world should follow, that you don't just accept something because someone tells you it's good and that it's what you need. You find out for yourself and you make up your own minds. So tonight I'm here to tell you my story. I'm not here to convince you one way or the other. That's up to you to make up your mind whether this is something that you want to live with or not. It's up to you the future that you want to have for your family and for your neighbors and for the environment of what seems to me to be one of the most extraordinary places I've ever seen. The thing about the United States is that the large swath of it now is basically a refinery. The whole portion of Texas down this way. So from 64 to late 80s, early 90s, we had about 25 wells in the area because they weren't economically viable. They just didn't produce enough gas to even pay for themselves. Towards the end of the 1990s, when they developed the slick water hydraulic fracturing techniques in the Barnett Shale of Texas, those also worked in the shallow tight sands wells of Wyoming, and made these little unproductive wells very productive and very profitable. So in the matter of half a dozen years, we went from 25 wells to over 200 wells. And that really, really changed life for us. It's, we went from living on a farm to living in a refinery. What it meant for the people of the Powder River Basin was they dewatered all the aquifers where people got the water for their homes and the water for their livestock. And the water was dumped down the coulees and the draws and allowed to run into the rivers and go on to Montana. And what it did to this arid ground was leach all the salt out of the soils. Once fertile but fragile soil became salt pan. The grass died. The old cottonwood trees that the pioneers had planted to have windbreaks withered and fell down. And now that the wells are no longer viable, that they're not producing gas, because unconventional gas wells tend to not live near as long as the old conventional style. They've been sold off to stripper companies that come in and just suck the last remaining bit out. And when those stripper companies can't make a profit anymore, they leave town in the middle of the night. The state of Wyoming now has, just in the Powder River Basin alone, 3,000 abandoned coal bed methane wells that the taxpayers of the state of Wyoming are going to have to pay to have reclaimed. So it really, the boom was a boom. That was about it. It blew everything to hell for people. This is just northwest of where we live. I wanted to give you an idea of what our area looks like. We have elk and deer and moose, a lot of birds. People come from all over the world to visit Wyoming like they do Australia because it's kind of unique. And that's another industry that's taken a big toll in this whole rush to extract in Wyoming, is the tourism industry. We have a lot of friends who live in very small towns, towns with 20 people, 50 people, 100 people, who run restaurants. They run services for the tourists that come through in the summer. Well, now there's a whole swath of the state that looks like hell. It's covered with roads and wellheads and production tanks. And so now they bypass on the interstate highways when they go to Yellowstone National Park. And those small towns are starting to dry up. They're starting to close the mom and pa gas stations and the mom and pa steakhouses and restaurants where people have congregated for years. So it really has not brought the economic development to the state that people had hoped it would. We also have a long history with Native American populations in the state of Wyoming. This is just up behind our house. These are petroglyphs from the Shoshone and Crow Indians. It's a very unique way to kind of connect with the past. You can stand in front of the petroglyph on the right and stand in the very same shoes of the person who created that artwork however many hundreds of years ago. Up behind the house were structures called teepee rings that when they set up the hide tents that they lived in, they stacked stones around the bottom. And it was a marker. That was about the only mark left on the land, was the rock art and the teepee rings. Those were there till a few years ago, until well pads needed to be built. And now it takes about 20 minutes with a dozer and everything's off to the side. You can wipe away your history in the blink of an eye. And one day you can take a piece of ground that you've picnicked at for years, that you may have taken your children to for years, and it's just gone. It looks like a parking lot. It really changed for us in a very dramatic way. The places that we knew weren't the same anymore. First of all, if you live in a very rural, remote area, you lose all your privacy. And the use of your land is drastically altered because there's people coming and going 24 hours a day, a lot of traffic, big pieces of machinery, and people making decisions on your ground about what's happening there with no consultation with you. So it really erodes your sense of security and your sense of privacy. Then after that, you start to see the landscape change. With us, they dozed flat, big rock formations that have been there for thousands of years. They dug up large portions of our irrigated alfalfa fields. And then all the infrastructure goes in that we have to look at for the next however many 20 or 30 years. So this is the alfalfa windroad. If you look up in the back, you can see the oil production tanks, and off to the left is the bluff where the petroglyphs were at. Next slide, please. This is looking from our house kind of the other direction, out towards the mountains. The thing that's important about this is all the white spots that you see out here are oil and gas production facilities, wellheads, production tanks, and all the related roads. They go in the middle of the fields, they go in the middle of the dry land. Anywhere you live in the state of Wyoming where you own the surface and someone else owns the mineral rights is called a split estate ground. What that means in the state of Wyoming is that mineral rights take precedence over any surface rights. We have no say in what goes on the land. We can't say no. We can't tell them where to build a road or where not to build a road. And they have laws laid down by the state of Wyoming, or procedures. The first procedure says that they're supposed to come to the landowner and negotiate in good faith to come to a surface use agreement. And if negotiations are not possible, they can post a $2,000 bond and come onto our land. So good faith only goes as far as $2,000 buys you. And we simply did not know what modern unconventional gas drilling looked like. We had an industry that came to us and said, we want to be a part of the community. We want to be here and provide jobs. We want to be sure that your sons and your brothers and your fathers have jobs that they can depend on. And we bought it. You know, looking back, I guess we did see it coming and we didn't recognize it. We were used to the conventional type of gas and oil drilling where they drill into a pool of gas basically and suck it out of the ground. It's very simple for them to do that. But this, they came in and they really embedded themselves in the community. They started sponsoring events at the school. They started sponsoring the rodeo at the county fair. They started working with Habitat for Humanity. Everywhere you looked, Encana Oil and Gas was making a contribution to the community, and they were telling us, we want to be your neighbor and we want to, you know, do what's right and treat everybody good. And I come from a part of the world where you take people at their word, and I think a lot of people foolishly did that. And their word wasn't worth the air that came out of their mouth to make the sound. Because when things started to go wrong, next slide, they weren't anywhere to be found. This is what it looked like. This is our house. We were still building it when they started drilling real close to us. The state of Wyoming says no oil and gas drilling any closer than 350 feet to a domestic source of water. The well that you see behind the house is 370 feet. There's one just this side. You can just see the edge of the pad that's 355 feet. The one in front of the house is actually shade over 200 feet. Because we have all these great regulations, but the state of Wyoming won't hire any inspectors to come out and make sure they're actually following the regulations. So we were the ones left to try to deal with this. We were the ones left to police the land. We're the ones that have the most to lose. This is a little farther off. There's actually a little over 200 head of cows out here in the cornfield that's frosted down, just to show you how close and what it's like to live in this. And this is a small gas field by comparison to a lot of things. But when you live with this, we were complaining because the derrick lights kept us up all night. And they said, well, we'll take you to town and buy you a hotel room for a week, 30 miles away. So right there it tells you just about how much they understand what it's like to run a farm, to have animals that you're responsible for. We went from living in a very remote area to having this industrial process in our lives 24 hours a day. You have people driving around that have no accountability to you on your place. We had people that would come out and be walking around right behind the house up in the rocks looking for arrowheads, and we'd say, what are you doing? Oh, well, I work for an Encana and they own all this ground out here, and I just wanted to come out and see if I could find an arrowhead. You try to explain to them, no, this is our ground. There's no concept of private property rights or what it's like to actually have something that you would like to keep unspoiled. Now it's like being under an occupation. They have a lot more say on our land in a lot of instances than we do. They have more authority over what goes on our property than we do. And a lot of people wish that they had been more aggressive in countering the spin and the propaganda that the industry spewed out, but we didn't. This is what the hydrofracking process looked like from our front porch. These are small wells. So the fracking was small scale compared to a lot of the fracking that goes on. The results ultimately wound up being pretty detrimental. So this is about 800 feet out the front door. In the United States, a large portion of the chemicals that they use are exempt from disclosure. They're trade secrets. They like to say it's just like Coca-Cola's secret recipe, which is a crock of you know what. I think that house of cards is starting to come down that it's safe. If it's safe, why do you have to have exemptions where you don't have to disclose the chemicals that you're using? It goes beyond trade secret. It goes to the fact that these are deadly toxic chemicals that they're injecting into our water, and they just absolutely don't want us knowing what they're using. But the weight of evidence, especially in the United States, is building all the time. You can only put on so many confidentiality agreements. You can only buy off so many politicians. People now are starting to do their own testing, and they're finding results consistent with what the EPA has found, that there's toxic chemicals in the water that can only get there when they're placed there by man. And it just goes back to the old, what I've been saying over and over again, if the government's not doing it for you, you need to do it for yourself. It's just not going to hold up. You can only lie so damn long. I don't have anything to lie about. I've lived this firsthand, and I just want to try to prevent it from somebody else. They're keeping secrets, and there's a reason they're keeping secrets, because this isn't safe. If it was safe, they'd come out and tell everybody what they're using and alleviate all of our concerns, and they refuse to do that. No matter what level of concern we expressed, we were just blown off. This is what it's like when it takes place right behind your house. Right behind the ridge, there was an old gas well. There was one of these ones that had kind of petered along for a number of years, and they figured they could go in and frack it and make a lot of gas, and they did. But They fracked it 14 different times over the period of a week. And every time they fracked it, the previous picture you saw, everything went up when they released the pressure out of the well, and it crashed back down over the top of the sandstone ridge that's right behind us and just engulfed the house. I went up there fairly unhappy with what was going on and asked him, what the hell are you exposing us to? Well, as I do, there's men walking off the derrick, no respirators, coveralls, hard hat, breathing this crap in, and the guy goes, look, our own guys are in it, it must be safe. Well, if you've got any common sense at all, you know right off the bat that there's something wrong with that. It smelled terrible, it made your eyes swell up, it made your nose burn. I guess the first health impacts I really saw were with my mother-in-law. She lost her sense of smell and her sense of taste. And at first we thought maybe it was something unique to her, but now my wife is having the same problems. And a lot of the neighbor ladies are losing their smell and their taste. And there's women who have neuropathy where their arms and their legs go numb. And a lot of the men suffer chronic fatigue and ringing of the ears and chronic headaches. And you know, anybody who works on a farm or a ranch, there's tired. There's working tired, and then they're so tired that you feel like you can't function. And that's a completely different thing. We've seen mental problems where people lose cognitive abilities. They lose the ability to speak in complete sentences, and they lose the ability to have a clear train of thought. But I think the thing that probably disturbs me the most are children seem to be the most susceptible to this. Kids with nosebleeds, kids with kidney failure. You know, we have neighbors who, when their grandkids visit from 30 miles away, the youngest daughter or the youngest grandchild, who's now 5, I think, has had kidney failure 3 times just being at Grandma and Grandpa's house. And for them, what that means is they don't go to Grandma and Grandpa's house anymore. The grandparents now travel to the town. It's safer to go to town and see the grandchildren there than it is to bring them out to the country, where it should be the cleanest place on earth. It's a farm, you know. They should be able to go there and see food being grown and experience what life really is, and it's unsafe for them to be there. We can't even hardly go outside at times because the fumes from the production tanks are horrible. We have BTEX chemicals that evaporate out of the tanks. You can taste it. My youngest son, who's now 15, was 3 when they really started doing the heavy drilling right within 350 feet of our home. Started having seizures and has spent the last 12 years of his life on anti-seizure medication. Has just now given the bill of health where he can come off of his seizure medication. But it's more than having seizures. When a child has seizures, it affects everything that they do. He's had learning disabilities. He's had issues with you know, physical limitations where the medicine would just make a zombie out of him. And every time we leave home, every time we go somewhere else, he'd feel better. We all feel better when we leave home. The symptoms go away. I can go to Manhattan and visit friends that I've made in New York, and I feel better in the city of New York breathing air in that city than I do at home living in a county where there's less than a person per square mile. It's really disturbing. It takes a horrible toll on you. So after you survive the drilling, after you survive the fracking, after you survive people coming and going in massive truckloads of equipment up and down little gravel roads, then you've got an active gas field that has to be operated, hopefully, in some sort of correct manner. This is about 30 feet away from the main irrigation canal that feeds the 200 acres of our place with water. And this is a production tank that holds all the produced water, that includes drilling chemicals, flowback chemicals from the hydraulic fracturing, as well as any of the petroleum hydrocarbon compounds that exist underground. Something else that you also have to remember is when you take the naturally occurring petroleum hydrocarbons and you introduce these chemicals from the fracking and drilling process, and you pressurize them to crack the ground, and you put them under the heat and the pressure that's underground, you create other compounds that a lot of them have never been seen before. The scientists we work with often refer to them as daughter compounds or tentatively identified compounds. So what happened here was the man backed up to the production tank, loaded some water in the back of his truck, and when he drove away, he forgot to remove the hose from the back of the truck. And it ripped the fitting out of the back of the truck. So he just drove around in a circle until all the water was gone out of his truck and then went home for the day. We happened to be thinking about moving cows on through here, and we were going through opening gates and making sure the way was clear, and here's this big pool of black bubbly water. That what had happened is out there when they drill, and I've talked to some people that said there's some problems with this in a lot of Australia. When you drill a gas well or an oil well, the drill pipe is hollow, and they pump the mixture drill mud down through the middle of the pipe. It lubricates the bit, and that helps bring all the cuttings and stuff back to the top. They come up the outside of the pump. They go into a mud tank that has a shaker that separates the mud and the cuttings and allows them to dispose of the cuttings and do what they have to do with the mud. But there's something called lost circulation that occurs. That's where the mud goes down, and on its way back up the bore, finds an exit and takes off out into the substructure. So they had huge problems with that in the pavilion area. They use stuff, they call it lost circulation material. It's whatever crap they can dump in the mud to stop the mud from disappearing underground. Sawdust, shredded paper, shredded tires. They used all this stuff to try to block these holes up, but what it did was it introduced bacteria into the subsurface, and they started having basically big bacterial infections in a lot of these gas wells. So this water sitting in the sun had like green and black cottage cheese floating in it. It was the bacterial colonies developing in the water. What do you do to kill bacteria? You dump biocide down the well. So we've got these wells that have this problem where we have no well integrity because the casing in the cement's not done properly. We've got all of the fracking chemicals and the drilling chemicals that have gone down the hole, and now they're dumping poison down there to kill the bacteria. So basically what they did was they came out and took a front loader and scooped the worst part up and then brought a load of gravel in and just covered it up so it looked good. And when I called the official that oversaw this, he said, well, I really trust in Canada. They've done pretty good work, and just hung the phone up. Indifference is amazing. The dog and I were down early one morning, just got out of the pickup to start changing the water, and we could hear this funny hissing, bubbling sound. What had happened is this well was about 3 years old, and the flow line, the line that brings the gas, everything that comes out of the ground on these wells, from the wellhead to the production equipment had ruptured in the field. And it was just boiling up through the ground. It looked like what we would say in Wyoming, like a mud pot volcano in Yellowstone. It's these big gray mud pots with the water and the steam boiling up through them. We now have a big salt pan dead spot that's about 50 feet wide and goes the full length of the field. And this is like the death from 1,000 cuts. This stuff happens around us all the time, and pretty soon you've got a field that's been patchworked by the wellheads and the roads and the production facilities, and then you start having these. And sure, we might have a very productive 200 acres, but start taking big chunks out of the middle of it. Where, as a lot of you know, in salt ground, all you get are invasive weeds. And on top of that, a lot of this drilling equipment that came in had been in Texas and in Oklahoma and in New Mexico. They have species of weeds we'd never seen in Wyoming before, but we've got them now. So we've got ag ground that's been industrialized. We've got this crap boiling up through the ground whenever a pipe seam fails or a weld fails. And I can tell you why this happened, because I welded pipeline out here for a while. You can buy pipe with a wall that's 1/4 of an inch thick, but stuff with 1/8 of an inch wall is a lot cheaper. It's all about the bottom line. And we welded pipe that had a wall that was only 156 thousandths thick. It's like welding muffler pipe together. Little piece of sand, little piece of slag goes through the pipe and cuts a groove. It doesn't take long before the pipe's worn through. This is kind of a regular occurrence around us now. We've got this whole infrastructure that's starting to fail. My neighbor, Lewis Meeks, probably the most unlikely environmentalist that you would ever meet. He was one of the first neighbors that came to me and said, John, I think they've really done it. My water's changed. He said, it's starting to smell like it's got kerosene in it. That's the water out of his tap. It's black. It's got a sheen on it like when you drive through a parking lot of a gas station after a rainstorm's gone through, the rainbow sheen. Used to provide 25 to 30 gallons of water a minute. Now, after about 50 gallons, it just shuts off. The water takes 2 or 3 hours to build back up before you can pump another 20 to 50 gallons out of it. And it smells like kerosene. It's the most god-awful crap you've ever smelled in your life. So, well, our water still looks fairly normal other than it fizzes, kind of like club soda. Our neighbor's water's black, smells like diesel fuel, or yellow and smells like diesel fuel. But the recommendations from our Center for Disease Control were don't drink the water, don't cook with the water, and if you bathe in it or wash dishes or wash laundry, open the windows of the house and ventilate it so your home doesn't explode from the methane that comes out. And as you've all seen on video clips from the United States, there's water that lights on fire, and that's the most incredible, stupid thing to see water catch on fire, but it's happening. This is my very, very good friend, Jeff Locker. This is the man that I probably respect more than anybody out there. He's the man who, when something goes wrong, this is the guy people turn to. A number of years ago, there was a gas well out behind their house, and they were doing some work on the gas well, and Jeff said he was out between the house and the equipment shop working on a tractor. It was kind of a nice warm day, and he said his wife Rhonda came running out, and she said, Jeff, the water in the washing machine's black, it's plugged up and it's running out on the floor. So right about that time, he got the washer shut off. One of the guys on the workover rig came through the